Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into something that literally shapes the life of every single person on Earth, but it's completely invisible. You know, back in the day, the value of money was tied to actual physical stuff. Think vaults packed with gold or silver. That put a pretty hard limit on how much money could even exist. But today, well, let's jump right into this fascinating reality. Modern fiat currency? It isn't backed by physical gold at all. No way. Instead, it's backed by economic management, public trust, and institutional credibility. It's essentially an entire architecture built on belief. And that brings up a really crucial question, right? If our modern money depends entirely on belief, belief in our institutions, our governance, the continuity of economic policy, then what actually gives it real, tangible purchasing power on the global stage? I mean, why does one currency get stronger while another one tanks? And why do billions, literally billions of dollars of capital move across borders every single day just reacting to these shifts? So to figure that out, we're going to explore the 4 structural pillars of modern money today. 1, inflation and interest rates. 2, economic output. 3, trade and capital flows. And 4, political stability. All right, let's kick things off with Pillar 1, inflation and interest rates. First up, we've got to talk about inflation, which is basically the rate at which prices rise. Simply put, it silently eats away at the purchasing power of your hard-earned money. Think about it. If your country's inflation suddenly spikes, that daily cup of coffee is going to cost you more. And on an international level, your domestic goods suddenly become way too expensive for anyone else to buy. That for sure severely weakens the global demand for your currency. Now, to fight off that loss of purchasing power, central banks turn to their primary weapon, higher interest rates. By making it more expensive to borrow money, they essentially cool down the domestic economy. But here's the cool part. Globally, this acts like a giant magnet. Higher rates attract foreign investors who are hunting for better returns on their capital. So that pumps up the demand for the currency, makes it appreciate, and at the exact same time, crushes inflation. To actually see this lever in action, let's rewind to 1979. The U.S. was facing a brutal inflation crisis, right? So the Federal Reserve stepped in and cranked interest rates up above 15%. 15%! I mean, by today's standards, that's a shockingly aggressive number. It was incredibly harsh medicine, and honestly, it triggered a domestic recession. But it worked. It successfully crushed the inflation and totally restored global confidence in the U.S. dollar. But, central banks sometimes have to pull that lever in the exact opposite direction. Take Japan in the 1990s. They were dealing with the exact reverse problem, persistent deflation, which is where prices just keep continuously dropping. That kind of sluggishness forced them to drop their interest rates down to near zero just to try and jumpstart the economy. And a lot of that was actually driven by some pretty unique structural and demographic factors, like a rapidly aging population. Moving right along to Pillar 2, economic output. At the end of the day, a currency's value is deeply rooted in the raw, productive capacity standing behind it. We're not just talking about financial markets here. We're talking about what a country physically and intellectually creates. To measure this, economists usually look at 2 main metrics. You've got GDP, or gross domestic product, which captures the total value of everything made strictly inside a country's borders. Doesn't matter who owns the factory. Then you have GNP, gross national product. Think of GNP as tracking the passport of the money. It includes what a nation's citizens and businesses are earning all over the world from their overseas investments. So a rising GDP is a huge signal of economic strength. It means production is expanding and income levels are going up. This kind of vitality acts just like a magnet, drawing in foreign investment and directly driving up demand for that currency. We saw this play out massively during Japan's unbelievable economic boom from the 1950s through the 80s. It just supercharged the yen. Similarly, the relentless, rapid expansion of China's GDP since 1978 has massively elevated the Chinese renminbi on the global stage. Bottom line, productivity equals currency credibility. All right, that brings us to Pillar 3, trade and capital flows. You see, a currency doesn't just exist in a vacuum. It's constantly being weighed against all the others out there. When we look at how a country interacts globally, we start with the balance of trade. That's just the basic scale of your exports versus your imports. A trade surplus, that means foreign buyers literally have to purchase your currency to buy your stuff, which drives up demand. But the real big picture here is the balance of payments. Think of this as a massive financial funnel that accounts for all the broad money flows, foreign investments and loans, not just the physical boxes being shipped around. And understanding that difference, that perfectly explains the US dollar paradox. The United States runs massive, persistent trade deficits, meaning it imports way more goods than it exports.
Now, traditional logic would say this should severely weaken the dollar. But the dollar stays incredibly strong. Why is that? Well, it's because the US attracts an absolute waterfall of foreign capital into its financial markets and government bonds. The global hunger for these investments completely outpaces the trade deficit.
But here's the catch. Relying on foreign capital to prop up your currency is a highly dangerous game if your underlying economics aren't solid. Take the 1997 Asian financial crisis, for example. You had several nations highly reliant on foreign capital inflows. But when a sudden loss of investor confidence hit in mid-1997, that capital didn't just slowly recede, it fled overnight. This massive, immediate outflow just instantly crashed local currencies and triggered some really severe economic contractions. And finally, we arrive at Pillar 4, political stability. Because honestly, all the interest rates and GDP growth in the world mean absolutely nothing without this invisible bedrock. Strong governance builds this sort of economic fortress that attracts investment. It's exactly why the Swiss franc is globally known as a safe haven currency. When global panic sets in, investors just flock to it. And its value isn't backed by military might or anything like that. It's backed by highly predictable regulations, a long history of political neutrality, and just unparalleled institutional strength. But when that bedrock cracks, man, the results are catastrophic. Look at Zimbabwe in the 2000s. Step 1, you see a total collapse of political and economic discipline. This instability immediately triggers Step 2, which is massive capital flight and severe hyperinflation. I mean, it got to a point where the government was printing $100 trillion notes just so people could buy a loaf of bread. Literally. And then finally, Step 3, the inflation gets so absurd that the national currency essentially just vanishes from daily use. So looking at all 4 of these pillars, inflation, economic output, trade flows, and political stability, we're left with a pretty powerful realization. Since our money is no longer tied to gold or silver, it basically acts as a bridge between a nation's internal life and the global economy. The strength of a currency is just a reflection of the strength of the system standing right behind it. Money is, quite simply, the ultimate expression of trust in that overarching macroeconomic system. Understanding that our money relies entirely on trust, and seeing just how delicate this massive balancing act of productivity, trade, and politics really is, well, it leaves us with one final, kind of wild question. If confidence is the ultimate currency, how long can central banks perfectly balance these massive forces of inflation and capital before the system breaks? Definitely something to chew on. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the systems around you.